Hi, Vincent.
Hi,
How are you? I'm
fine, fine.
Cynthia.
Yeah, I recognize you.
We met, right?
Yeah,
Some
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Well, I wish you were here.
Mm,
So let me just explain some technical details to our audience, and then I'll come to you, okay?
of course.
So hi, if you want to ask questions, you have slido.com. And so through your smartphones, you can dial that code, not dial, tap that code in slido.com and I will receive them here. Or you can just say your questions from your seat because the room is tiny. Vincent, thank you so much for your film. And I was watching it and thinking about the different layers that it has and how it relates to history, but also how it's so timely, so
Hmm.
much a commentary about where we are at now and very hopeful in a
Hmm.
strange and
Hmm.
beautiful way, I think.
Hmm.
I wanted to start by asking you, so your film does make it does speak of cinema and it does speak of the political capacities of cinema, but it goes much beyond that, and it goes to also speaking somehow of its limitations in a way, maybe, right? And
Hmm.
how we need to pass into the movement and into reality, and
Hmm.
there's something that needs to go beyond that. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to ask you, what made you what what made you start this project? Was it La Chinoise or was it Omar Blondin Diop and his story? What made you start it?
Well, there is a there is a film that comes before that, about a few films, but let's say research that is connected with the Situationist International, so a group of revolutionary and intellectual who were active during the late 50s and in the 60s, and who were very instrumental in the uprising of May 68 in Paris. And what I did since a few years is like researching the African connection. Within within the movement, but also let's say a little bit aside. And Omar is one of these guys who African Marxists, who militant, who were interested in those ideas, and who was never a part of the group, but who read them and who was kind of influenced and brought actually these kinds of um, magazines and thoughts back in Senegal when he came back in '69. Um, and the very beginning started with this image of him reading the Situationist, let's say, it's not a magazine, but let's say their review. It was a sort of a review. Um, and that's the last issue, actually, the issue that was published in '69, and it's a kind of mise en scène. He has a friend photographing him in Dakar, like reading this. He's posing, and this guy who made this photograph is one of the witnesses in the film. So he doesn't really speak about the image, but he is the one speaking about his connection with the situ. So this is the very beginning, like seeing that there was a connection in Senegal with the movement that triggered my attention in like 6 years ago, when I was preparing the pavilion for the Venice Biennial, where I actually shot a film in Congo, connected with the presence of one Congolese militant within the movement. And so there is this film that comes before. And when I researched this in 2015, what I was super surprised was actually that the family was still asking for the reopening of the case around his death in '73 in a prison in Gorée. And I thought this was really crazy that like more than 40 years after he was still like present, and his case was discussed in newspapers. And so so I decided to dig into this when I was invited for a show at Centre Pompidou in 2018. And so that was coming with the anniversary of the 50 years of May 68 in Paris. And I really wanted to avoid this kind of, self-mythologization, mytho also mythographic addiction of the Parisian to speak about May 68 as a Parisian event only, you know. So I wanted to really show that and materialize the fact that it was also a very important event in the global south, and that's why I actually decided then to leave and to go to Dakar. To at the beginning was just like making a first repérage for the film, but it turned out to be a first version of the film, and then it's something that I really pushed further and also try to radicalize the motto of Godard, who said that it's a film in the making, a film en train de se faire. And I really wanted to not just use this as a gimmick, but really like push it. And so there are three versions of this film, and the film that you've seen is of course the last and the finished version, but was really something that I processed and showed, but every time a sort of finished version of itself. And there was one version that was a third shorter for the TV also. So it's a very interesting exercise. It's completely anti-economic in terms of cinematographic economy. So it's also pushing the producer into a sort of I wouldn't say a dangerous zone because we work with small budget, but still it's like really a sort of conceptual way of working that was also very interesting because in the end you mix like old version and it's really like a mess, but it helps you also to, I think, to arrive to such a layered version. That's what you mentioned also in the beginning of the question. So really like this layering of the film, which is really something important. It's really a montage film also. I think it's only possible if you work the material to a certain extent and like deep enough and with sort of intensity. I think that you're so familiar with it that you can push it.
And that's why we see the images being shown to people there.
Yeah,
it's kind of an open air cinema. So can you explain us a little bit to whom you were showing the images and if there was any sort of conversation around those images?
Yeah, so when I came back for the second shooting in 2019, I brought the first version. I showed the very first version, which was like 45 minutes, and then I showed like raw material from the witnesses, so all the interviews that I did for the film, and I made a selection like of, I would say, 40 minutes also. So of raw cut of that, and then we had like it was like a cine club. So after we discussed this with the audience, and the audience was partly like the people in the film. So the ones I call like the interprète in French, like the interpreters, like the people playing their own role, like all these pretty young people from Dakar. And then the witnesses, not all of them, but most of them were also there. And then an audience from Dakar, like young people, mainly from the outskirts, also where I shot a part, like the train scene is also like going from the center and going to the outskirts. So also we invited like young people from the outskirts to attend the screening, and there was like a real like one hour 30 discussion afterwards, which is not part of the film. But what is important is of course like the sort of mise en abîme, and the film is really about using the idea of the spiral as a sort of metaphor for what history is. So history is not something you're disconnected with. It's really something that is written in the present. And I think that cinema is really the tool that enables you to recreate a sort of a connection with the past. Because Omar is also a very interesting character in many dimensions, but one of the most interesting and triggering element is that he played his own role in a fiction by Godard. So he's a sort of documentary character who has been kidnapped or hijacked, you know, by fiction in some way, because at the very beginning, Godard wanted to make a sort of well, he always said that that La Chinoise was a kind of documentary. And I really like when he speaks about documentary. Also, it's in the very beginning of the film when he say a documentary is something a little bit touching and ridiculous. Is sort of another motto that I really like. So I think I'm playing with that also, of course, because the shots at the beginning of the film they are made in the last exhibition that Godard made, a huge exhibition actually in Nanterre. So this is amazing. It's like when I came back from Dakar, Nicole Brenet and a few people around, like the collaborators of Godard, the young people who worked with him for a few years, they decided with Philippe Ken, who was the theater maker, playwright, directing this theater in Nanterre, to use the old theater to make a Godard show. So all the loge and all the rooms. So it was really a crazy exhibition with many films, mostly like the video years. So also the work with Anne-Marie Mieville. Very like a very touching experience also, and to be able to encapsulate this in the film was also like very interesting as a sort of meeting, as you said, of the past with the present. What I wanted to say is that the only images so far that with Omar as a moving body are the ones in La Chinoise, and then a few ones that I could like spot in the news where we see him with Daniel Cohn-Bendit, the leader of May 68 in Paris, one of the like 4 or 5 main leader, but he was really like a sort of a very mediatic person, and we see Omar right next to him. So it's also like, bringing some kind of credit to some rumors, information that Omar was part of that movement, that was the movement that started also May 68. Up to now, there was like no really like images that were able to testify of this. So it brings also like these new images, the old new, like, because even the family had never seen these images. They are like, yeah, making this film possible also, and bringing him as a character in his own right, not only from Godard, but also much beyond, because that's what the idea of the film was, in one way, to make a portrait of him only by the people who really like knew him, and the family and the friends. And I really wanted to shoot like his friends in Dakar and not like European friends, because I think there is something very special to connect it with Omar that is happening in Dakar, that is still there. And
And you bring that with young activists and young political
Mhm.
voices, right? Those are people who are having specific roles in the present.
There are really various people, like in La Chinoise, when Godard was really engaging with 5 different characters. Of course, it's a little bit cryptic sometimes, and this film is really hard to understand if you look at it now. So I kind of there is nothing which is literal or really replayed, except like 2 sequences that I really like try to put again in movement, or trying to do something with like a camera movement. But that's mostly it. Like all the content is of course different, and is really like connected to I would say to now. But all these characters are not militant. You have people who are really connected with China, who have, for some of them, like spent like more than 10 years over there, are fluent in Chinese, in Mandarin. And what I'm trying to show is that, of course, there's a sort of attraction for China, and a sort of gamble, or a sort of, I would say a sort of a transcultural operation, which is also being played on an economical level that completely surpass us, and that we have no idea of or about. And what I try to show is that the attraction for China, which was for Maoism in the mid 60s, for a generation of African intellectual, has moved to a sort of a new deal between the authorities of China and Senegal, and of course in a lot of other African countries. So what is being shown there is a sort of yeah, again, it's a sort of actualization, partly with humor, partly with, I think, also a lot of honesty and things that I've just seen, and I was so amazed by this. For example, by the kung fu, trainer of the from the national team of Senegal, who is like this major champion, but also a Tai Chi teacher. And when I entered the Confucius Institute in Dakar, he was there teaching, and I was like in a Godard film. I was arriving in a scene. It was not even so. It was just crazy, And so at some point, it's really like trying to filter a few experiences that I was living over there, and really like being very, very organic, working with the crew and with the people, and proposing things and trying things, and developing this kind of other layer of the film, where we, in one way, we have, of course, the portrait of Omar, let's say, like the documentary part of the film, and then we have like the essayistic element, which is really trying to not be ridiculous, as God I would say, not just be sensible and into, let's say, a portrait, but trying to really think about what the film can do today as an art form, and how we can use it also in order to, I would say, in some way to, of course, to to operate some kind of transmission within Senegalese society. That's one for one part, and then I would say that maybe for another public, but partly also for an African public. It's not just like saying the portrait is for Senegal and not the other part, but I think also for maybe for a more cinephilic public, really trying to radicalize and to think about what kind of heritage of Godard we are indebted, or we are dealing with, and to what level this film can also challenge a little bit the errors and I would say, the wanderings of Godard in this period, because this is a major film, of course, in his filmography, sort of last fiction film, just before the militant Maoist thing, which he's actually mocking in La Chinoise, but he's going to engage like really seriously after that. So I think there are a lot of layers, of course, in the film, which I think quite research also, and so I don't know if you want to discuss those.
Yeah, but there's one thing that I think is quite important, and that's why I was also talking about the limits of the relation between politics and cinema, or not the limits, but the questions that it opens, and sometimes it opens more than really offers any sort of solution or balm, which is, on the one hand, I find quite important, the fact that your film, by recovering the image of Omar Blonde Diop next to Daniel Cohn-Bendit, kind of signals something that we in Europe we tend to forget and erase, which is the importance of liberation movements in Africa for our own revolutions, and how they informed our own revolutions. People who were coming from there, students, intellectuals, etc., that actually helped a lot of the political voices in Europe to find a form and to find an idea of movement that was going beyond the local and could become global. And the other question that for me is important in your film is the way somehow, even though that is like that, there is something that's the idea of movement basically in your film, and how movement is a concept for cinema, but it's also a political concept, and it's movement not as an entity but as a movement, as a flow, and as a necessity, right? And so there's always something to be done. It's not static, and it's very beautiful, because after the train conversation you have that dance scene, and it's quite obvious, not literal but obvious in a quite embodied way, how the political is played through your film, which I felt it was a little bit a comment on where Godard stopped, in a way.
Well, I think we could have, of course, is not like shooting a bullet in my own feet, but I think that through the limitation of the production and the fact that uh, yeah, that it's a very limited kind of film in the end in terms of what I was able to really do with people on location. I think there would have been of course an interest in pushing more with people acting their own role to develop something beyond. So on this level, I think that the lesson, of course, the Godard and Gorin lesson about, is not about making a political film, but making politically a film. That's it's.
Yeah.
I think that of course, it's. You should also not be too literal with this in thinking that just because you engage with the actors to a level that they decide everything in a film is going to be a good film. We also know that most of these experiences were not always successful, even if some of them are fantastic. But so I think there is also another, there are other ways, and also in the way of working with people, there are a lot of layers and way of doing that are not necessarily connected with them just speaking about what they have in mind, because the witnesses they already speak a lot. So I think that it's all about the balance and trying to create also some situation which are meaningful, which sometimes don't need too much talk, and so there is something there that I think is still a way to deal with this issue. I think on the level of the movement, of course, it's really like the title of the film in itself is a sort of a declaration of I would say is like a comment of what I try to do is in some ways a minor cinema, a minor gesture, like is being humble, like juste un mouvement is not un mouvement juste. It's like, of course, it's a play with also, the famous motto of Godard saying, il n'y a pas une image juste, il y a juste une image. Uh, I think it really speaks about one of the big issue from that for these guys at that period is about about what is being just. Today we have seen that uh, um, I would say it's not today. I think the issue of democracy, and if there's one issue that tops everything, is really the issue of justice. And we've seen, with the Black Lives Matter and many other issues that have followed, like these 2 last years about emancipation of like the women movement and the Me Too and all these different movements. It all the time is really about fighting against injustice and trying to create and having a voice for oneself and being respected. So this very basic, the very basic agenda of democracy remains like justice. And of course, there is something for an artist that is interested in politics that is also the question of, in French, as is maybe the case also in Portuguese, but in French, the 2 words of justice and justesse are just, like siblings.
Let me try to translate to English. Justice and
well, justice also, being just is also like fighting the right form, like the aesthetical agenda of trying to translate the politics into aesthetics. I mean, this whole agenda and this long discussion that has been crossing the whole modernity, I think, and the whole and haunting the whole art scene for a century, and maybe more, is is a sort of agenda that is also the agenda of this film. So it's really about trying to pay justice to a character who really deserves his memory to be, I think, cherished, and that really needs to be highlighted in some way for all what he did, even if he died really young, and what he can constitute as a sort of a character for the young generation. And on the other hand, there's a quest to tell this story in a certain way that might not be like simplistic, that might not be literal, that might not also be some kind of a naive tribute to Godard, but a sort of a critical homage to, of course, what he tried to do. And I think that he brought us so much. I mean, in terms of reflection about cinema and what cinema is about, that in some way there's a way to engage with this also, and to pay tribute to that, but to do it in a way that, of course, I think in a zone where there is something to be discussed about Godard's cinema and his relationship to alterity, and mostly to also like some kind of African character that he used in different films, and most of the time in a problematic way, or in and this is one of the issue of this film also.
Yeah, and we see that. I mean, it's interesting that for me, and maybe this is personal, and I find Godard a deeply important filmmaker, and many times an absolute genius and an absolute mark. We cannot think about cinema today without him. That's a given. But what I find interesting in your film, and I do not know if this was intentional, was that by extracting the figure of Omar Diop from La Chinoise, making a commentary on La Chinoise, but extracting his figure and going deeper in his story, the idea of liberation is transferred from Godard to Omar, and it's transferred to the present. So really the spine of the film becomes the idea of liberation and the possibility of liberation. And then, of course, you have the questions of neo-colonialism and new French colonialism, then new Chinese colonialism, etc. But it's kind of a revitalization or giving back the dynamics of liberation or bringing back a possible dynamics for liberation. And that seems to me, from your film, some sort of movement that coming of transference from Godard's film and Godard's work to the history of this real man, mm-hmm. and which is very interesting because we tend to mystify liberation fighters, right? Mm-hmm. and liberation intellects, and especially African liberation fighters and intellectuals, etc. We tend to know a very small part of the story and then make a plain dimension image of them, and not really grasping the complexity, and especially not really grasping the transmission and the possibility of future that they open. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you had this in mind, or if this is my own
of course,
personal.
No, I think avoiding the trap of mythifying Omar is also. It's not up to me to say if it works or not, because I think it's a matter of balance between the witnesses. You have some people who are like commenting his attitude not in very positive ways, like saying he was really like a radical, and that he wanted to go too fast, and that he made mistakes, and that they had the good way, and of course these are people he kind of fought with and really quickly like separated from. But I wanted them to be in there also to create this kind of a complexity of a character who you at the end you wonder also that that everybody has a different version of the same person, which is quite interesting also. But I try to avoid in making him like this kind of myth is a little bit at the moment in Dakar, while nobody knew what he did and who he was. I mean, except his friends and family. So I think this was important, and I did it because there was nothing that had been done. But this create also, of course, the question of my space and my legitimacy in being there doing this. And that's why the relationship, because I think it's all about relationship, and the story of Omar is really someone who was raised in Paris and come back also in Senegal with all these ideas of people that he has been dealing with and that he's been enriched by all these discussion and these readings. So in my opinion, we're all completely, all bastards and completely métis, cultural in many ways, and that's why I think in the film the limitation is being played also by this relationship with my assistant, who is playing his own role and who is in some way talking about this. I mean, and we can. I think it's something that is kind of subtle, but I think it's also apparent that there is something being played there that
Yeah.
speaks also about my presence, but also my absence in the image. What I'm glad is that there is another film which is being done at the moment and is being finished about the death of Omar. So, and I knew this when I started. So it's really something that is connected with the case and why the case was kind of stopped by Senghor at that time. Well, of course, this film is also going against the grain on Senghor's image, which is a very popular image for all of us. He's seen also as someone who was an intellectual, one of the first intellectual become an artist, poet, becoming president. But yeah, there is a problematic image that we had, and the film is also speaking about that. What I wanted to also add is that there are many kind of sources in the film, and one of the sources also, and it's all this is in the credit, but of course they go fast and nobody read everything. But I have also a personal history, not directly myself because I wasn't raised in Senegal, but I have two brothers who were born in Dakar, and like all the Super 8 images that are in the film are. Some of them we shot ourselves when we were there, but most of them, like the historical image, they are from my grandfather, who shot them over there at this very period, because my parents were living there between 65 and 68. Mm-hmm. So it's really the period of the story, and in some way there are like family images also coming back in this kind of essayistic mix of different sources, and there are many different other sources that we didn't mention, but that are also connecting situationist filmmaking with, for example, with one of the character in the film. So there are many kind of links that are done in this level.
We will have to finish here. I will just comment that I noticed how you showing the camera and how you did the montage, the editing. You were kind of constantly putting cinema as something that weaves together, but also something that deconstructs and leaves the center empty. And so placing the filmmaker in quite different ways and sometimes difficult to grasp ways.
But also making space for the spectator, which is very important.
Yeah, because exactly because of that, by doing that, because otherwise, if you hadn't been so clear in that, probably the film could become a very oppressive object. Thank you so much, Vincent. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting the film, and thank you for this long talk. And I hope, of course, to be able to see you.
Yes.
Soon and next time.
Yeah. I hope we can welcome you here in Sheffield soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.